For anyone that doesn't know you, would you mind just introducing yourself and kind of your role at the Future Forest Company really briefly?
Yes, I'm Matthew Cook, and I am the peatland project manager at the Future Forest Company. I've been here about a year and a half, and I manage all of our peatland restoration projects.
Next question is, I guess for the past couple of years, peatland has been really overlooked and kind of undervalued for how significant it is. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, if you have any kind of insights to share and why you think it's been so overlooked and how you feel about the fact that it's kind of having its moment in the limelight now.
Well, it's great that it's in the limelight. I've been restoring peatland for 5 or 6 years now, and when I started, it was never on the media. There was very little talk about it, and I'm glad that it's getting a moment in the limelight. It's previously been overlooked in some ways because nobody really wants to go there. It's always wet. There's no shelter. There's no shade. There's no features really other than the landscape itself and the sky. It's a very beautiful landscape, but it's quite inhospitable. And previously it being used, people used to cut it for fuel. People used to cut it industrially for compost. And it was drained for sheep and cows predominantly, or for conifer plantations. And while those things were good at the time, and in the land management style of the time, it's been realized that we've lost a lot of this habitat, and that it's actually contributing to flooding, to wildfire events. And in restoring it, we make a positive contribution to a carbon store, because peat is made of carbon, and we restoring a valuable biodiverse habitat and mitigating in a natural way flooding and wildfires. So it's the least we can do is repair the damage that we've done in the past, although we don't blame anyone for wanting to have sheep and cows on there, because people need to be fed and trees need to grow. But it turns out it's the law of unintended consequences, that you try these things and it maybe isn't the best idea in the long term. So I'm pleased now that there's an awareness of how we treat the land, and that we're doing our bit to repair what we've done.
I think you touched on this quite briefly, but are there any species, little animals or plant life that are kind of associated with peatland, just based on your experience?
The main plant associated with peatland is sphagnum moss, and it's a wonderful plant. That's what creates the peat, really, just by growing up and up and up, and it's decaying down and down and down. And it is an amazing plant. It holds up to 50 times its own volume in liquid, which is why it was used in the past as dressings for wounds in the First World War, and also in nappies and things like that. One of my favorite plants on the peatland is the sundew, which is our very own carnivorous plant, which eats midges and flies. It's a beautiful little thing. You can often see photographs of it in the literature and what have you. And it's a good one for the children to get into, because it does actually eat midges, and that's something to be pleased about, I would say.
Really useful plants, it sounds like. In terms of, you've touched on this slightly before, mentioning kind of that peatland has been quite degraded over the last few decades. If we look at it currently, what are some of the threats that it's currently facing?
Threats in the past have been getting planted with conifer, being drained, being extracted. But we're mitigating all those things now in Scotland here. And there are various licenses still out there to extract peat commercially, but they're coming to an end, and not so many are getting renewed. There is now legislation which says you cannot put a new forest plantation on deep peat in Scotland, and there's a lot of government grants available to restore peat, so it's a lot less under threat than it has been in the past.
That's amazing. That's good to know. And in terms of the benefits of restoring peatland, obviously we know that it's quite a valuable ecosystem. And in terms of, I guess, both locally in terms of the impact it'll have on the community that it's in, but also more globally in terms of the fight against climate change and just restoring biodiversity in general, what are some of the benefits of working to restore peatlands that have been degraded?
Well, in a local sense, flood mitigation is a big issue in certain communities in Britain, as we've seen a lot of flood events recently. And a lot of the hills where all of our water comes from, including drinking water, are covered in peatland at the top. And in terms of regulating the flow of water, healthy peatlands do that very well. So instead of a flood going fast and big, it will regulate it to more of a curve like that. And for drinking water as well, water companies were having to pay a lot of money to clean out their facilities because organic peat matter erodes into the water courses. So water companies are making an effort to restore peatland as well. And in terms of carbon, it's fairly well known now that it's a vast carbon store, and the peatlands across the world hold millions and millions of tons of carbon, more so than all the forests of the world, I believe. So in those terms, it's very important that we retain that carbon store and we don't let it erode further.
Thing that you touched on, water supply, like we don't often realize how valuable ecosystems are for the things that we use in our everyday life, especially something like a bog. Like we kind of just overlook how it actually impacts our everyday life quite significantly.
Yes, we live more and more removed from nature in our current civilization, and we lose touch with where all of our actually all of our the things we need to survive and to thrive come from nature. And when people talk about ecosystem services, that's a way of reminding us that we get everything that we need from nature. And it's difficult for people to understand when, even like this interview, we're all on screen, and you learn a lot by actually going out there. And people wouldn't want to spend much time there in the rain, really, and it's difficult to walk through, but it's being recognized now what a valuable place it is, you know, and it feeds into our lives in ways that people don't really understand. But it's good that we're singing the song of the peatlands, you know, to let everyone know.
And I think those are so important, like you've said, for climate change and just all the threats that our planet is facing. Like restoring these ecosystems and taking care of them is kind of more important than it's ever been before, which sort of leads me into my next question, which is that peatland management is quite a unique position to be in. And I'm wondering how you found yourself here and specializing in such a, I guess, overlooked ecosystem.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder that myself. How did I end up here? And I think Pete chose me to some degree. I used to work on wind farms, installing meteorological masts across the UK, and we often installed these masts on peatland. So I was aware of the working conditions of that. But if you build a wind farm on peatland, then you have to dig a lot of peat out for the turbines. And I'm much happier now. The fact that I'm up there still working and what I consider beautiful places, but I'm working to protect it rather than to industrialize it, let's say, which, whatever your views on wind turbines, it is an industrialization of the natural environment. So I'm pleased that I can do something to help preserve the peatlands. And it's a strange place. In a strange place to work, in a way, like native forests, coastline, mountains, these things are all beautiful and awesome and easily recognized, and partly our natural habitat to live in, like an ancient woodland, we feel at home there. And a coastline, people have always hugged the coastlines, and you get a lot of food and resources from there. But a peatland, it's not quite like that. It's sort of the dark side of our own consciousness in a way. There's a lot of secrets down there in the bog, hidden away, under the surface. And one of the things that interests me is the way that peat preserves human remains, and they've dug up bodies thousands of years old, and they can tell what's inside, what they had for their last meal, and what there's no other way to preserve things so well unless you maybe embalm things like the Egyptians. But it's changed what we know about history by finding these artifacts and bodies in the bog, and in that way, it's a cultural store as well, and a historical store. And although we may not be cutting much fuel for peat for fuel these days, the people who know the peat bog best and who found all of these things were people who cut the peat by hand to heat their homes. And it's something that we should always remember and respect about that as well.
Interesting. I didn't know that it was such a good, I guess, preserver. Is there a way to, I guess, uncover some of the hidden secrets without damaging the area, or is it kind of quite sensitive in terms of finding those remains and things like that?
Well, they were always found by people cutting peat for fuel, which is an ancient practice across Northern Europe, I believe. And yeah, there's some research that suggests there were ritual functions and people were buried in there. And also, if you want to hide a body in times of strife, the peatland might be the place to do it, because you're never going to find it, and people don't want to go looking in there. There's these days they use science and what have you to find out more about it, but all over the country there are objects that have been found in peatlands, and who knows what's in there. I've heard stories of all kinds of stories about, there's a train in a bog somewhere that fell off a train line. You can't get these things out once, horses and carts, cars, people. So it's keeping those secrets in there, and we may never know a lot of it.
What has made you so passionate about working in a field where you're getting to restore ecosystems and I guess do something that's positive for the planet? Because it's not always an easy field to be in. It can be quite disheartening at times. It can be really challenging, and obviously it's challenging terrain too. So what keeps you motivated and passionate about this kind of work?
Well, I kind of like being in a sort of niche job that really nobody's ever going to notice. In a 1,000 years, no one's ever going to know what we've done, and it's not about a monument to our success or anything, or getting plaudits. It's just about giving a little bit back. And sometimes if you use Google Images and what have you, and you look down on it, and you can go scroll on the timeline, and you can look down at a drained peatland with all these cuts through it, lines through it, and then you scroll forward to where we've restored it, and there's all these little stitches, which are the peat dams that are blocking those drains. And when I look at those sort of images and I think about it, I feel like we're sort of healing up the scars that we've created on Mother Earth, and that's why I do it, because it's the least we can do. We've made a lot of choices which have caused damage to us and the planet, and if we are finally seeing that we've done that and restoring, or at least making an effort to restore what we've done, then that's a good thing, and that's why I'm into it, really. And I focus on getting the work done. We're at a time when there are government grants, there are possibly carbon money if you go that way for landowners. So it's a time when the mechanisms are there to do this work. So I think it's important that we crack on and do as much as we can while while it's in the news, while people are aware of it, and while there's money to do the work. Then we need to crack on and restore as much as we can.
I love that. And what would a really good day in peatland restoration look like for you? Like, how do you kind of quantify, not necessarily success, but I think in some areas, it's, you know, when you plant a tree, you can see the tree growing, and that's kind of a very tangible thing. Is there something like that in peatland restoration for you?
Yeah, well, certainly if you in some aspects of restoration, such as bare peat, if you're revegetating, and if you've surveyed a site that's really quite degraded, and then you manage to get a restoration project, and then a year or two later, if you go back and you see the vegetation growing again, or the hags reprofiled and vegetated, and it feels like a bog again, it's wet again, and then you can leave safe in the knowledge that you've done the right thing, even though like no one may ever know. Yeah, it is a good feeling. It's a good feeling to see how quickly it returns as well. The water level going back to sort of natural level, and the vegetation thriving again. It's a slow process, but you can watch it happen. It's not that slow. You can see it happening, and yeah, it's nice to go back a few years later and see what if it looks near natural, then you've done your job, and if nobody ever knows that you did it, well, that's fine. It's done, which is the main thing. I do like getting out on site, and I like having new sites to survey and to look at, and I like wandering about in the hills on my own. I think that's a sort of essential thing if you're into peatland restoration. You have to like being up there in all weathers. And yeah, it's a good job to have. I like it.
You probably spend a lot more time than the average person around peatlands. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you as your favorite thing about it? And you may have already touched on it, but if you had to bring it into just one thing that you love about them.
What I think it is that it's a place that is not human place. That it's a place where you can go as a human, but you can't stay there because there's nothing for you there really. Yeah, you can pick a lot of berries, which are very good. You can maybe get some fuel if you're living in those times, and you can gather sphagnum moss for its many uses. But part of the magic is that it's not really touched by humans, and part of our job is the places that have been touched by humans, in order to extract things, basically, that if we restore them, and then they're given back to nature then, and then we can stay away. And I think it's been put at about 10% of the world's landmass should just be left alone by humans to let nature do its thing. And that's my favorite thing about peatlands, that it's not for us. We can go there and it's awesome and beautiful and wonderful and wild and magical and horrible sometimes, terrible. And we can visit, but it's not our land. It's Mother Earth's land, and it does provide for us. And we should give it the respect it's due and visit, but leave it alone,
I love that. I feel like we need more places on the planet that are just for nature.
I think we do, and that's part of what Future Forest Company is about. That we're planting woodland, we're making ponds, wildflower meadows, and these are spaces for nature. Yes, humans can enjoy them, and we have to put a bit of effort in as humans to create them or recreate them. But ultimately, it's for nature itself, you know, and we can take from nature in terms of beauty and joy of experience, and the health-giving properties of just being in wild places. But we should leave them be as much as we can as well.
I believe you've written a song about peatland, if I'm not mistaken.
I've written a song about peatland, and I'd wanted to do this for a while. But to write a song, you've got to have a sort of viewpoint, an angle or whatever. And I'm being very interested in the preservative qualities and the bog bodies that have come out in the past, which people have written poetry about and all sorts. Once I put myself in the shoes of thinking, I'd like to be buried in the peatland, and then in thousands of years when they dig me up, I'll be preserved, and then whatever's in my pockets will be there, and they'll learn other things about history, you know. And once I had that idea, that angle, it just kind of flowed out of that, really. So it's not the happiest song I've ever written, or because it is about dying and being buried in a peatland, but hopefully it illustrates the one of that aspect of peatland that is a historical store, and that holds the secrets that may well be revealed in thousands of years, as they've been revealed to us from thousands of years ago. So yeah, and do enjoy, listen to the song, and do enjoy. Yes.
For anyone that is reading or watching, just how can people at home help contribute towards peatland restoration?
Well, people can start by avoiding using compost that's made out of peat. It doesn't actually have any nutrients in it anyway, although it holds a lot of water. They add nutrients to the compost. There are a lot of other types of compost now, so we don't really need to extract it for growing plants. Obviously, you can avoid burning it on your fire unless that's a traditional practice in your area, which it is in some places still. You can volunteer a lot with various organisations if you want to learn more about peatlands. You could probably sponsor us to do our work. We have some projects that aren't necessarily within the current government schemes and that, due to size and what have you, and we're trying to restore as much on our land as we can. So check out the website, yeah, and join us in restoring peatland if you can, yeah.